Welcome to Vanguards of Democracy. I'm Sean Shaw, and on today's episode, I'll be joined by Natasha Pierre, who's an award-winning speaker, author, and certified professional life coach with over 20 years' experience in her field. She provides personal development coaching, mentoring, and consulting services to individuals, small businesses, and corporations. We'll touch on topics that include mental health, finding the right therapist, and maintaining one's peace. But first, we'll be covering a tragic situation happening right here in our backyard. Residents of a local apartment complex are living in life-threatening conditions that include black mold, broken AC, rodent infestations, just to name a few. This is unacceptable anywhere, and our community needs to be aware of what's happening so that we can hold those in charge accountable. Please stay tuned. This is Sean, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some things that are going on in the community as it relates to toxic exposure. And toxic exposure can be mold, it can be lead, it can be really anything in the environment that makes you sick. So what is toxic exposure, right? So toxic exposure can result in long-term complications and affect a victim's physical, emotional, and financial well-being. And that's kind of the crux of what a lawsuit would be about when you've suffered damages because of such exposure. And I mean financial damages, medical expenses, rehabilitation expenses. If you've got pain, emotional distress, permanent damage, loss of quality of life, all of those types of things are compensable if it results from this toxic exposure. And so that is kind of what a case of toxic exposure would be based on. You would sue based on these types of damages if it's caused by toxic exposure. And listen, if you think you've got one of these cases, you should reach out to Vanguard attorneys and let us know and see if we can assist with this. But this is kind of the basis for such a lawsuit. You've got toxic conditions. They lead to these sorts of damages. And so we're going to talk about some examples that are happening right here in the community that our law firm actually happens to be involved in the two that I'm going to talk about, or trying to get involved in the two that I'm talking about as well. The first one I want to talk about is one that's immensely frustrating to me, and that's Silver Oaks. We've talked about Silver Oaks on this show before. Silver Oaks is in the news. If you're not familiar with what's going on at Silver Oaks, you should be, because I can almost guarantee that you wouldn't want your family living in the conditions I'm about to describe. You wouldn't want your kids living in the conditions I'm about to describe. And if you wouldn't want your family and yourself and your kids living like that, then why would it be okay for someone else to have to live like that and someone else's kids have to live like that? Now, that's a question I'm asking you, whether you're white, whether you're black, whether you're an elected official, whether you're not, because these conditions didn't just pop up yesterday. These conditions have been going on long enough that it's outrageous, and quite frankly, not enough is being done quick enough. Let me describe the conditions going on over there, because they include exposed wall with mold in it. When it rains, water is literally trickling down with that exposed wall. And you don't have to be a mold expert to understand that when mold grows there, what that means. It means your kids are exposed to mold spores. It means you are exposed to mold spores. It means you have asthma problems. It means you have respiratory problems. It means you may have cognition problems. All kinds of problems can happen with just a little bit of increased mold exposure. Imagine what mold resulting from open walls, huge sheets of open walls, not a little cut, an entire section of your wall missing in your house, and black mold sitting there, and won't nobody come fix it when you call. The infestation of rats and rat feces all over your house, inside and outside. The roof of your apartment may cave in with sewage because the pipes are in such bad conditions that when your neighbor upstairs flushes their toilet, it can lead to raw sewage leaking down into your house. And then if that sewage is leaking down for a long enough time, it makes it so weak that some drywall comes down from the ceiling. You want to live in that? You want your kids to live in that? No. So it's not okay for these families to be living like this and to have been living like this for months, several months, years. And when complaints are made, They are not fulfilled in a timely manner. Sometimes they're not fulfilled at all. Sometimes they may come and spray some bleach on the mold and call it a day. Um, it's unacceptable, and we've got some community, wonderful people in the community who are doing what they can about it, who are trying to make a difference. But the residents, I've said this on the show before, but it bears me saying it again. The residents are tired of being told that something's going to be done, being told that we're working on it, being told that we're calling the right department about it, being told that we're going to sign a letter about it. Do something, fix it. And it's time it got fixed. And it's time that certainly action happens, right? And so it's just very frustrating to me that enough isn't being done quick enough. And if it's frustrating to me, who doesn't live with mold, who doesn't live with rat infestations in my house, who doesn't live with sewage leaking down from the top floor, if it's frustrating to me, I still want you to imagine how those residents feel when they go home and take their kids home. One of the residents was telling me she's moved all her kids' beds away from the walls because they get sick when the beds are right on the walls because that's where all the mold is. And that she has to scrape the mold off herself every now and then because it builds up so much. What are we doing? That's not okay. That's not okay for anyone to live like that. And it ought to be top of mind to all of us to do something about that. That happens in a community, that exists in a community. That's an indictment on all of us to allow that to happen. And we all need to be outraged, no matter where we live and who we are. We need to all be outraged that that's happening. In a similar fashion, now I'm going to talk about mold in a little bit, but I want to switch to some lead for a little bit. And let me say, Silver Oaks is located in a predominantly African-American neighborhood, and it is subsidized housing. That shouldn't matter, but I'm going to tell you why in a minute that I brought that up. Gopher lead plant, and you've probably heard about this. The Tampa Bay Times did a Pulitzer Prize winning news segment on the Gopher lead plant here in Orient Park in Tampa. That's over by the casino. Some of y'all who go to the casino, not myself, of course. But what's happening over there is there's a lead smelting plant. Essentially, they take batteries, car batteries, melt them down. Very dangerous, very toxic. And what's been going on over there is awful as well. The conditions on the inside of the plant are scary. There's lead dust everywhere. The rules that should be followed aren't being followed. Some of the workplace requirements, some of the gear that they are supposed to wear is broken and old, and everyone knows it. Some of the fans don't work as well as they should to get the lead out. And so these workers, predominantly workers of color, these workers that are working inside the plant, covered in lead dust, even if they have a mask on, they still have the dust on them, go home, hug their wife and hug their child, lay on the couch, do this over a period of time, and everyone's got high lead levels in their blood. And that is very bad for all your organs. And what's been going, so the Tampa Bay Times was kind of letting us inside to see what it's like to work inside, what it means to the children of the workers, what it means to the workers themselves, how injuries are reported. It was a very, very comprehensive piece that the Tampa Bay Times did that essentially said that plant is got a lot of bad stuff going on with it, has had for a long time, and is creating lead problems not only inside the plant, but outside the plant in terms of increased lead levels in the air all around that. And so now what can happen if you're exposed to lead is, high blood pressure, early strokes, liver, kidney disease, cognitive problems, particularly if developing children are exposed to lead at a young age. It can be awful for their not only uh, development in terms of their intelligence and cognition, but it can be in terms of just their physical development. There's a high instance of problems with the children of workers that are working at the plant here, and so that's what everybody likes to give lawyers bad names, and all we do are chase ambulances, and all we are greedy lawyers. When things like this happen in the community, oftentimes when someone is sued, it's not even about the money at the end of the day. It is about changing behavior for people. And unfortunately, what makes a corporation, what makes a business change their practices is not a slap on the wrist. It's not a strongly worded letter. It's not even a bad news article. It is a lawsuit or the threat of a lawsuit. That is what makes a business change bad things that they're doing, right? And so when you allow mold to build up on a wall to the point that it gets kids and their parents sick, and you won't come when they call and ask you to clean it up, when you do come, you spray bleach on it and leave, you're going to get sued about it, rightfully so, to not do it anymore and to not have those people live in those conditions anymore. And if you won't do it when they call, well, then maybe you'll do it when I call. But when I call, I'm not calling on the phone. I'm going to call in a court of law. And the same thing with Gopher and the lead plant in Orion Park. If you're not going to do when the federal government calls, when the county commission calls, when the EPA calls and tells you to get your lead plant operating in a way that's safe, well, then maybe you'll do it when Vanguard calls, when we call. And we're going to call with a lawsuit. We're going to call with a way and a mechanism to make you actually change. It's one of the reasons I became a lawyer. It is because of the ability to make change. It's the reason I was in politics. It's the same thing fuels both ideas. You can make change by being an attorney. And so when you go after these bad actors, again, it is about making them stop doing what they're doing. Not only are they going to have to pay the family any damages that family who's currently being hurt might have, but they will stop doing it so that another family isn't exposed to it tomorrow. That's what happens when you go after bad actors. Both of those things are important. One, you make sure that you compensate anyone that's injured. But two, you make it so that it doesn't happen again. And so in these two instances of this kind of exposure, these are pretty egregious cases in my opinion, right? And these two cases are both frustrating because the victims are predominantly people of color, whether it is the Silver Oaks neighborhood and where it's located or who was working at the Gopher lead plant. And it is also acutely a problem because of how it affects children, because of kids are developing. And so kids, as they are growing, when they're exposed to lead or they're exposed to mold, it's a problem for their developing bodies. And so when they may develop, autism or some kind of cognitive impairment, or when they have asthma or respiratory issues, and it's because of a company not doing what they're supposed to do, that's frustrating and that's maddening. And that's something that simply we won't stand for. It's something that the entire community shouldn't stand for. It's not just who we are, where we live, what we do for a living, whether we, live close to these areas or not. We should all be outraged that just to kind of cut a few corners or to make a few extra bucks, someone's exposing our kids to mold and lead. That ain't right. And we're going to try to do something about it. So that's kind of, I wanted to talk about those two things. We're going to have some residents perhaps of Silver Oaks on to describe kind of the conditions that are going on over there. And again, I want to repeat this. You wouldn't want to live in those types of conditions. You wouldn't want your family member to work at a lead plant that had the safety problems that Gopher does. So why is it okay for someone else to go through it? It's not. All of us ought to be outraged in the same way. So this is Sean. I appreciate you joining me for this segment. Welcome to another episode of Vanguards of Democracy. This is your host, Sean Shaw, and I'm here with a mental health expert, educator, Natasha Pierre, who I'm Facebook friends with, but we've met for the first time here. Natasha, thank you for joining today. We're going to get into a whole bunch of different things about you and maybe even some personal stuff, but I want to start with, so the audience knows, kind of tell us a little bit about who you are and kind of how you got to where you are and what you're doing these days.
So I am a mental health educator. Background, I'm originally from the Virgin Islands, born and raised. My family is Trinidadian, so I've got West Indian origins. And
that's another episode. We'll talk about Trinidadian women, but go ahead.
Yes. But I'm here in the U.S. I came for college, and I've lived in several states. I've been in, I feel like I'm on my 19th career right now, but mental health education is something that I'm passionate about because of my own journey and story, and it's what I love discussing most.
What exactly are you doing right now in that area?
What am I not doing? Advocacy. So sometimes that could be going to the VA or calling a school or going to visit an apartment building that isn't assisting someone who has a disability or a mental health diagnosis. It's education, doing things like this, speaking to different organizations and corporations. It is some mental health coaching, and that's something that I don't do a lot of, but I'm going to be getting back into it. And whatever I want to do, I'm working on my second book now. Yes. So that's going to be on resilience. And it's all the stories of triumph that I've had in my life.
Well, I don't want to spoil the book,
okay.
But I do want to ask about how you got to being a mental health educator. We all have a kind of a personal journey that gets us to where we are now, no matter where we are now. But tell me, how'd you get there?
I was diagnosed with a mental illness over 20 years ago, bipolar disorder, panic disorder, generalized anxiety, depression, EDNOS, which is an eating disorder not otherwise specified. And 20 years ago, there were no advocates. There was no one who was speaking about mental illness openly. And so I had to become my own advocate. And that's from navigating the system of care, understanding medication and dosage, knowing what worked for me, what didn't work for me, knowing how to request things from my job. And by me doing so, I gained a lot of knowledge that now helps me help others.
How did you get the first diagnosis? Because, it's particularly in certain communities, particularly communities of color, the mental health is taboo, and particularly getting treatment for it, right? So what made you actually get the professional diagnosis? Like, how'd you get there? I think that's important.
In hindsight, I'd say I've always been a different person and a different child. I just thought differently. In college was the first time that I said there might be something more to this. I experienced a series of losses, 12 people dying within 6 months. And I now know that I was catatonic, but I wasn't calling it that at the time. And I went to the counseling center on campus. I was allowed to stay on campus while I wasn't attending any classes because I needed therapy. And that was the start. Several years later, I was in New York City for 9/11. I was supposed to be at 9/11 at Ground Zero on that day. And survivor's guilt manifested for me with extreme panic attacks and anxiety. So I went through 6 months of fainting all over New York City. And after seeing every physical specialist, I was told, maybe you should see a psychiatrist. And I did. And that was what started this journey for me.
That's really important because I want people to hear that. Well, I was on your Facebook account stalking you today prior to this, but I want to ask you, it was something that caught my eye. And it was a statement you made that essentially said preachers, pastors, spiritual advisors even aren't necessarily mental health experts, and they might need to stay in their lane. Explain that a little bit more, because, when we go to church, preaches everything. Preaches a lawyer, doctor, a psychiatrist, therapist, all that, political advisor. Explain that statement a little more, because I think there's a lot of truth in that, but I want you to dig into that.
It's like a spiritual leader being an attorney. You're not, unless you have the degree. You are not a mental health educator unless you have the degree, the credentials, the experience, and many don't. For many people, faith has been weaponized, and it's been used to say, you
Watch
know
the
what?
TV.
Exactly. You're not trying hard enough. You need to fast and pray, build up your faith. That's why you're going through this. You need a demon cast out of you. It's injurious. It's hurtful. It's dismissive of the person's experience, and I would like them to stay in their lane.
Jesus will provide, but you still need to address the underlying problem. I always,
Absolutely.
thoughts and prayers are great, but we still need to do faith without works is dead type deal.
Yes.
You've had this journey and it kind of led you to do what you're doing for other people. When did you decide, look, I've got all this experience, I've got this passion, I want to use it now. I've kind of helped myself, I want to use it to help other people. When did that happen?
I've been doing it all along, quietly, silently. Only a few friends knew. In 2017, I got a life coaching certification just because I felt I needed to have one for people who care about those things. But it was September 22nd, 2019, when I decided to come out officially and publicly. And that's when I shared my story for the first time publicly in Orlando, part of the This Is My Brave nonprofit. And I shared what I had been through, and I've been sharing publicly ever since, because people need to know that someone experiencing a mental health challenge or living with a mental illness looks like me or you.
Tell me about your first book.
My first book is Provoking Thoughts, Volume 1, 101 Inspirational Quotes for Daily Living. They are my divine downloads. Faith and spirituality is very important to me. And over my life, over all of my experiences, I always get these divine downloads and I write them down. And so that first book was a stretch exercise. It was, Natasha, you've been saying you want to write a book. And a friend challenged me, write it in a month. It's like, what? Do it now. And I did. I compiled 101 of my thousands of quotes, put them in a book, shot the cover myself, laid it out, and published it.
I see what we were talking about this. I see why it's hard for you to have fun. You got a lot of stuff going on. Books and Zooms and all kinds of good stuff. If I want to drill deep into this now, if someone thinks that they may be having that something's not right, or they may be having the beginnings of a mental health issue, problem, what are your recommendations, or how at the beginning?
At the beginning is to get honest about what you're feeling and what you're thinking, devoid of any judgment that may come from society or what you've heard. Just be honest with yourself. If you're having trouble sleeping, if you're impatient, if you're moody, that's just fact. It doesn't mean you have a mental illness. It could mean that you're really stressed. It could mean that you're grieving. Then, my first step was speaking with friends. I speak a lot about, the difference between family, friends, and tribe. Your family, they share, the same last name. They've got your DNA. Your friends, you guys pledge the same frat. You go to the same church. But your tribe, they know you, they get you, they understand you, and they can speak into your life. I shared first with my tribe, and then we okay, let's find a psychiatrist, let's find a psychologist, a therapist, and that should be the first step. People speak a lot about social media, and it's got its pros and cons. I've found social media to be one of the most supportive places for people who experience things just like me.
I am surprised by that answer, really. I would have thought it would be destructive in terms of people kind of coming at you. You're saying it's the opposite.
If you have your tribe, and I think many people aren't putting enough time into finding and connecting with core people. And I know our society is all about climb the corporate ladder. Let me get a gazillion Facebook friends. I want to be friends with everyone because other people are friends with them. No, that's not it. My peace is number one. It is non-negotiable. So sometimes if I just don't like what you post, I'm disconnecting. I may still say hi to you in person, but on my social media, that's my safe space. And I don't want to see what you post. And that's it. There's no additional conversation about it. My peace. And especially when you've had severe mental health challenges as I have had, I don't play with my peace. I don't play with my mental health at all. So people fall into one of two buckets. You're either contributing to the peace that I already have, or you are contaminating my peace. That's it.
Well, okay. I like it. My own, I didn't think I needed therapy till I went type deal, right? I was going through, it's not a surprise, going through a divorce, and I went to therapy and I continued going. I did not know, like I said, that I had any need for it. I was dismissive of it. I'm a man, so I don't need any of this. And the minute I started going, like the second or third time I went, I was like, oh my God, there's a lot going on here.
Yes.
And so I would just tell people, we just have particularly men, I think, have this mental block, because I talk to my friends about this and I can tell that their mental block is there, that you're just not open to it, period. That you don't, admitting a need to go is a sign of weakness. But I think actually it's a sign of strength to understand that, and the self-awareness that maybe there's something going on here that I could fine tune and get a little better, or address something that's going on. So like I said, I was dismissive, and but I will say it changed my peace, and it changed my life much for the better, going when I didn't even realize I needed to go.
We don't know what we don't know. So I tell people, give yourself 3 months of once a week therapy. You may say you want to go in talking about your boss or, your spouse, but after the third or fourth session, you're realizing I never got over that thing from third grade or
Right.
that thing that my college professor said. And so now you've got more things to talk about. And, therapy as a word, as a term, people want to step back from it, just like mental health. But what happens in barbershops? What happens in salons? What happens in safe spaces and places? The only difference is there isn't anyone usually that's trained in the modalities to help walk a person through their grief, their trauma, their pain, etc.
Let me tell you something. We need you at the Black Barbershop, because the foolishness that goes on in that, I'm telling you, it's funny. If I recognize that maybe I want to go to somebody or want to see somebody, how do I figure out who to go see, or how do I figure out what type of person to see, or what do I do next?
Well, 2 things. If you have insurance, start with your EAP. That's the first thing. And if you've got your employee assistance program, and that's through your company, your job, if you have insurance. If you don't have insurance, then you're going to have to do your research and get some referrals, maybe from friends. I tell people to begin with the end in mind. What is it that you think you need to work on most? Or what is causing you the most pain? And then seek out someone for that. So for me, when I look for therapists, I need to know that you've worked with someone who has bipolar disorder. You understand anxiety. Some people, it's important for them to have a Christian counselor. If that's important for you, do that. For some people, if the root of their trauma is based in a certain demographic, you need to exclude them. For example, if you have racial trauma, you know that you want a person of color. If your trauma is connected to being LGBTQ, you want someone who has worked with that community. So we've got to do our homework. And finding a therapist is like dating. The first one may be a dud. But do you say, okay, I'm done with dating forever? No, you pick again. And that's the same way you work with a therapist.
I hope finding a therapist is better than my dating life. But that's another episode. Maintaining this peace on a daily, how do you do this? What advice would you give to people because maintaining the peace is super important. And these days, I've realized the older I get, the more important that becomes to me. When I was 20 and 30, I didn't even know what you meant by keep. I didn't even know what that term meant. Now it's the most important thing in my life that I also want to do. How do you, on a daily basis, give some tips or kind of advice on people of how to make sure that they are keeping that peace, keeping that mental good aura around them?
I treat myself like my best friend. I pay attention to my body, my mind. If it feels off, I don't need to do pros and cons of why it feels off. If it feels off, I'm not doing it. Boundaries. I don't take calls before 9 a.m. And that stemmed from years of taking medication and still being groggy at 9 a.m. I don't want to talk to anyone before 9 a.m. unless I'm getting paid or it's an emergency. My phone stays a lot on do not disturb, because when I'm in a mode and I'm focused and I'm working, I don't want a call. I've trained, if that's the way to say, my family and friends to know how to interact with me, because it's what works best for me. And, my life is no part of my assignment is ensuring that other people are comfortable with my choices. this is my piece. And in order for me to be my best self, I have to be and do the things that keep me my best self. So my boundaries are high. My tolerance for things that disturb my peace is extremely low, next to none.
Boundaries is a huge part of this. And I want you to maybe kind of make sure and tell the people that you don't need to feel guilty for having your own boundaries. Your own boundaries are you, and you don't have to talk about that a little more, because I get I'll just say it's hard sometimes to establish those boundaries because you feel guilty in your own social circle or professionally that I've got to say yes to everything, and if I say no, everybody's hanging out. What am I? Talk about why boundaries are so important and why a guilt associated with establishing them isn't necessary.
I begin a lot with the end in mind, and the end is I want peace. So if I say yes to this, will it lead me to a place of peace? Will I be resentful or bitter because I thought they were going to do more but didn't? Am I going to be annoyed because it's taking longer? I say no a lot, and I'm unapologetic about it, because even if I'm laying on the couch watching a rerun of Law & Order SVU, I'm busy. Because that's giving me more life. That is adding to my peace. And so it's taken a while for me to get here, because I think I'm a recovering people pleaser and I want to always be able to run and help. But I removed the S from my chest. I am no longer a superwoman. I am not strong. I have divorced anything that says that Natasha needs to be strong. Strong has not done anything for me. It's really placed me outside of the circle of empathy and compassion and kindness. And so I do whatever I want, and I'm unapologetic. And if your feelings are hurt, I'm sorry your feelings are hurt, but I'm not sorry for the boundary that I've set and that I'm maintaining.
Bingo. What are you most proud of professionally? Because you got a lot of stuff going on. What I always like to ask people, not what other people would think you're most proud of, but what are you most proud of? Because that answer is oftentimes different than what other people might think.
Resilient.
You mean the book or just period?
Me.
Yeah.
I am resilient. I have had, partly because of mental health and partly because just of who I am, I have not had wonderful ends when it comes to work. Or let me qualify this: working for other people. It has not ended well, and it's damaged me, mentally, emotionally. But I'm resilient. I am most proud that I have bounced back from everything. I've bounced back from people saying, well, you're not a great speaker. You can't command a stage. I've bounced back from people saying that, you're not an amazing writer. Okay. Everything that people have said I could not do or would not be able to do, I've done, and I've done exponentially. So it hurt, caused me a lot of pain, but I am resilient, and that's what I'm most proud of.
I love it. We're getting to the end here, but I want to ask them, what do you do for fun? When you're not doing all of this wonderful stuff, what do you do for fun?
That's my challenge right now.
Obviously.
Law & Order SVU. I've seen every episode 3 times. SVU is my favorite. Okay. But I've done the others. Those are secondary. Anything really by Dick Wolf.
As long as the DA is my boy, Jack McCoy, anyone where he's the DA, I'm cool with. When they start getting where it's other lawyers, and I don't like anybody else prosecuting besides him.
So let me back up. So I was pre-law in college.
Okay.
Until my first political science class, and I'm like, okay, we're not doing this. So I went the communications path, but I've got an inner nerd, so I read case files just because I think it's cool.
Gosh.
I know. And this is why my assignment right now, my best friend is a mental health counselor, and she's like, Natasha, you need to do something fun that does not involve learning anything that you can teach. Because I'll be in it and I'm like, I can teach this. I can do. So I have a list of 101 fun activities.
Make a list
I know.
So that you could somehow start to have fun.
Because my fun, everything that I think of is related to helping other people. So I've got, roller skating, Zumba, dance, crochet. I've got a list but for fun, I love the sun. I love the water. I love silence. I'm an introvert. I just, play an extrovert in public, but I replenish by being by myself and relaxing, being near the water. That's fun for me.
Okay. Tell me, let's end here about politics a little bit. I understand that maybe you like to help people that are interested in politics. Why and how?
I've been in politics since I was 14. As a child, I was part of the Youth for Roy Snyder. He was running for governor. I hosted on St. Thomas the first live gubernatorial debate at 14. My mentor was a senator at the time and hosted a TV show, and I was one of the hosts on that show. And I've always had a fascination with civic service, with politics, with elections, with voting, always. And so throughout my life, I've worked with many people to help them get elected, commissioner, mayor, councilman, and hopefully soon a senator. And it's my pet project. Part of my background is strategy. It's a gifting, and it's just something that I'm great at, as well as publicity. So crafting messages for good candidates is something I enjoy.
I'm just sitting here smiling because mental health and politics don't go together, but they need to go together. But it's hard to maintain the balance and the boundaries and all that, I know, with politics. But I'm glad that good people are at least helping other good people to get elected. That's important. Yes. So I want to thank you for coming on. This was really good. We've got a photo here for you to join the Wall of Fame here. So take that and sign it. And we are so glad that you came. And when the second book gets out, come back and we will talk about it.
Thank you so much for having me.
We hope you can figure out how to have fun too this weekend. Thanks for joining us. Vanguards of Democracy is funded and produced by Vanguard Attorneys, a local personal injury law firm serving the Tampa Bay area with ingenuity and an indomitable work ethic. Don't forget to follow Vanguards of Democracy on YouTube or download episodes on your favorite podcast streaming services like iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And lastly, we're excited to announce that we're launching our new landing page, www.vanguardsofdemocracy.com, where you'll be able to ask questions, recommend guests or topics, and stay up to date with news and announcements. It'll be great. If you know how to bookmark a website, this is the one that'll make it worth it. Thank you.